Passwords suck. No, seriously, there's lots of issues with passwords. We'll go over all of that in this video, talking about passwordless, multi-factor authentication, and why you might need it now. What's up, everyone? My name is James Q Quick, and I'm a developer advocate at Auth0. What you're about to watch is a live stream that I did with a coworker of mine called Jarrett Helton, talking about passwordless multi-factor authentication, what those different factors are, and which ones are the best to work with. Hope you enjoy the video. There's time markers in the description below, so you can skip ahead to the different sections. That said, let's dive in. All right, welcome everyone back to the Auth0 channel. My name is James Quick, and I am a developer advocate here at Auth0. And I'm super excited to bring in some expertise from other areas in the company, specifically to talk about passwordless and lots of categories beyond that. And anyway, education information for myself and then for the people in the chat as well. So joined by Jarrett Helton, who's going to help kind of walk us through some of passwordless implications, MFA, that kind of stuff, what it all is. Do you want to do like an intro to everyone here? Let them know what you work on and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So like you said, my name is Jarrett Helton. I'm a software engineer on the multi-factor authentication team specifically, but work very closely with all of the IAM domain and kind of the login flows that we have here at Auth0. And I would like to go ahead and shout out my team while I have the focus on them, because it's a really great group of people that are working really hard on making the login experience at Auth0 great, while also really secure. Which is hard to do. So really smart people, really great people from product design to engineering. So I'm very happy to be working with them.
I think maybe the place to start, and this is kind of the headliner and probably the most interesting part, before we get into some of the technical details, is there's kind of this trend, or lots of people are commenting now on why passwords are not so good. And the average consumer probably doesn't think about this sort of stuff, but it's becoming more and more important from a security aspect, from an cost aspect, and all kinds of different details. Jared, do you want to kick off the conversation on like why passwords are maybe not as good as we thought they once were?
Yeah, definitely. So it is kind of a weird thing to think about, because if you think password, you think we're good, we're locked in. Like I have a safe, I have a password on that safe. It's good unless I blab that out. And the problem is that last part, like if I blab that out or if I write that down somewhere because I'm going to forget it. And like there are lots of studies, Google, Microsoft, surveys that are done by security consultancies that we actually see that 65% of people reuse passwords across multiple sites. So that's like saying that you have, 15 safes scattered throughout the world that are all using the same password. You don't know who's going to get a hold of that and be able to crack it and figure it out, which will then give them access to everything else. But it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. Like almost 50% of people use the same passwords for personal and work accounts. So it's not necessarily just like, oh, my Facebook is going to get hacked. It's also like my Facebook was hacked, but also my corporate Gmail was hacked because I shared the same like summer 2019 password.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I think myself and a lot of people probably forget that, like, because you get into that habit, it's probably used elsewhere. And just to be clear, Auth0, we do not do that. We are very protective of our stuff. Yes. And we use password managers. Just got to get that out there. But yeah, the implication of like, it's not just your stuff. It's like potentially company, enterprise stuff maybe too. That's really, really you want to be even more secure than your personal Facebook account.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere between 80 and 90% of all like data breaches happen because of compromised passwords. So it's like we have been able to recognize this weak point in our link. And there are a lot of different ways that we can mitigate that. Like you said, with a password manager, like using 1Password. Right now, I swear by it. I'm using it for everything. I have the family plan. I've made my partner start using it. When my child's old enough, she's going to use it because it's so great. It's so easy. There's a lot of good with it, but it doesn't like necessarily get you all the way there. I think an interesting thing was that I've seen a couple times where somebody says, "We'll just use more complex or like longer passwords," and I think, what is it? NIST, it doesn't actually recommend complex passwords, just longer ones. The complexity behind your passwords don't really matter. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter if you have like a $sign. Like, of course, you want to try and mix it up and have some good entropy in there, but you're going to need longer passwords if you want strength. And the longer the passwords get, the harder it is to remember. The more likely you are to just copy and paste it across everywhere, like write it down on a sticky note.
Yep.
And that's how these things get leaked. They're just not a strong factor for you to authenticate with.
Yeah, and to maybe put a couple of those together for before we even define what multi-factor authentication is. Like, if I were wanting to do good by my passwords, I would have different passwords for everything, which is impossible to remember. And then I would also not only have different passwords, but also make them longer individually, which makes it even more impossible for me to remember all that stuff myself. And then maybe that's a good segue into what is a password manager and how does it help us in that sense?
Yeah, for sure. So with a password manager, you are going to be storing all of your passwords, usually locally on a device. Like you can have it synced with your smartphone, synced with your laptop, and it's behind a master password, which has to be a variable length depending on what password manager you have. The reason why that is more secure than just having a password, because if you think about it, if you try to rationalize a password manager, well, it's like, okay, if somebody learns my master password, they have access to all my passwords. Like, that's pretty bad too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in a password manager, you're able to see the password, username goes to this website. Like, that seems bad. But also that means like you've stolen their device. Like, their password, you've stolen their device, you've gotten into their device. So long term, it does end up a password manager ends up supplying multiple factors to get access to your passwords, but it doesn't provide multiple factors for you to use those passwords on websites. So as a good segue into multi-factor authentication, and I'm going to use you as kind of my student guinea pig, James.
Yeah.
So could you name the three most common factors that we look at whenever we talk about 2FA or MFA?
Yeah. So now you're putting me on the spot. It makes me nervous. But three things. One thing is something that you have. So that would be like a physical device. Something that you know, which would be like a password. No pressure. Thanks, Tyler. Tyler is on my team. And the next thing, I forget the actual phrasing, but it's kind of something that you are, like it's inherent in you, like either like a fingerprint or eye print. That's not the right word, but like one of those things that's like inherent about you yourself.
Yeah, it would be what you are. It's kind of like called the inheritance factor. Okay. So yeah, we have what you know, which is knowledge, what you have, possession, and then what you are, inheritance. So those are technically like the main factors that most people tend to focus on because they are a little more tried and true, a little more like kind of easier to rationalize and be sure about. But technically there are other factors like behavior, geolocation. Those are factors like within the like technically speaking, but they're less common and a little harder to really implement and be sure about in the systems. So today we're just going to be focusing on knowledge, possession, inheritance.
So we've talked about passwords in general, not so great because from a consumer perspective, what we want to do is have one password for everything and have that password be simple so that we don't have to struggle to remember stuff. And then we kind of escalate that thing to, all right, what if we know we want to have different passwords for these different applications? That's better. What if we also want those individual passwords to be longer? That's better. But now from a user, it's impossible to remember all those things. So now we get into password managers, something like 1Pass or 1Password or LastPass. And then we kind of touched on MFA a little bit in terms of like, what are the three different things you have? So maybe give like a more in-depth definition of what multi-factor MFA, multi-factor authentication is, and then why we should use it in relation to the two things that we've just talked about so far.
For sure. So the way that I like to look at it before I go into multi-factor authentication specifically is that 1Password is kind of like a mitigation plan that a person can use to protect themselves. Like I can do that to protect myself. But enforcing multi-factor authentication in your applications and your websites, that's a way for a company or an application to protect itself and the users within its system. So multi-factor authentication can kind of be defined as an authentication method that requires the user to provide 2 or more verification factors to gain access. So you need to have what you know in condition with possession, inheritance. So like you need to know your password, and then we need to know that you are in possession of a phone that's registered in this account. So we'll send you a one-time password on your phone, and we'll send you a push notification and kind of show that that you have possession of something that we know this account owner has. And so that's a solid way to really protect the account, but it's not perfect. There are a lot of factors that vary in how much security they can provide. Before we start to go into maybe some of these other factors, though, I would like to show real fast how we can even just get to multi-factor authentication using Auth0. So I'm on kind of this getting started page here. It created a new tenant. Well, this is an existing tenant, so you might see some things already activated. But if you go over on the left here, we have the security tab, and then right under that is multi-factor auth. So if you go into here, you're going to see a list of the different factors that Auth0 supports within our users. So we have push via Guardian, Auth0 Guardian, Duo security. Duo itself is really awesome. We don't specify a specific factor because Duo has a bunch of different factors that you can enable through your Duo account. And then we also provide one-time password, phone messages, email, and then something new and exciting is WebAuthn with security keys and device biometrics, which we'll certainly talk about later. So you can come in here and then scroll down and choose how to actually require multi-factor auth. You can choose never, which is kind of like the default setting. Nobody's going to be prompted to enroll or authenticate with MFA. There's adaptive MFA, which is a really cool add-on that takes risk assessment to determine if multi-factor authentication has to be triggered. And then there's always, which since I'm on the always working on stuff with multi-factor authentication, I always have it enabled always. Yeah. So you go here, click always, and then you have a long list of factors with varying levels of security. Yeah. So with that being said, let's maybe touch on one of the first type of factors that you might use, and that's HOTP. So this is part of the whole OTP realm. So there's HOTP and TOTP.
And OTP, just to make sure people are clear, is one-time password?
One-time password, cool. Yep. So under HOTP specifically, that stands for HMAC, one-time password. HMAC is basically a type of hash for access codes. So within HOTP, Auth0 offers email, SMS, voice. I believe that are all the ones that cover OTP. Somebody might check me on that. Or HOTP, specifically HOTP. Yep. So HOTP is probably the one that we are all really, really familiar with. If you've gotten a text message with a code that you then typed into the website to verify that you owned a phone, that's HOTP.
So by the way, a good example of that, I did that twice in preparation for the stream to log into StreamYard and to log into the Twitch account directly. So we have it set up. It's kind of cool. We have in Twitch, we've got it configured to send a message to a Slack channel, our developer marketing Slack channel. So anytime we need codes to log into Twitch, it sends it there so everyone can see them. And then StreamYard, I think, sends an email to an alias for my team so that all of us get that too. So we all have those abilities to use those passwords to get in, or the token, yeah. I guess.
It is really common because it's really accessible. Mm-hmm. Like you don't even need a smartphone to use HOTP this way. Yeah. Whenever we talk about TOTP, you do kind of have to have a smartphone that is able to install applications. But HOTP is super accessible. Most people have access to receiving SMS text messages. So what HOTP is, it's essentially like a pretty basic algorithm to take a secret key, which is on the server, a counter, and then it hashes that. It performs another algorithm to then take specific bytes and create a short code for it. Because I can't imagine having to type out an entire,
Yeah, right.
an entire
It would
hash.
kind of defeat the purpose.
Yeah, it would. And so we are generating that code using an algorithm and then sending that off to a text message provider or email. And that's called out of band. We're sending it out of band. So once you type that in, you type that into the website, it sends it off to the server again. We're able to verify like this is the code. It regenerates the code. You would think that maybe we just save that code and compare it, but really you want to regenerate the code with the counter and the secret key. And something really specific to pay attention here, because it's kind of important, is I'm saying counter, and people may not necessarily know what that means. So a counter is really just like some type of way to determine how many times this authenticator has been used. So like we'll start whenever we generate a code, it starts at 0. Next time we generate a code, it increments to 1, increments to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a way to prevent like replay attacks. So it's just a way for us to track that, but also to include some entropy in our hash generation.
Cool.
So this is mostly common with SMS, email, voice. Back in the day, people had hardware tokens, like physical hardware tokens. You would press a button, it would generate, you would use it. I think that was really popular with the RSA.
Okay.
That isn't so popular anymore because it's very easy for the little clicky device to fall out of sync with the server, like the counters. They have to stay in sync. You can't, if they fall out of sync, you'll have different code generations and everything will just be a huge mess. But there is kind of a problem with HOTP outside of that security token. Having that hardware token, like a physical device that's generating the code, is a pretty secure way to perform HOTP. However, SMS, email, voice, technically not that secure. So I don't want to say that and be like, oh, this is terrible. It's having SMS as a multi-factor is certainly better than not having multi-factor authentication. I think we need to set that expectation. However, SMS is not a protocol designed to be secure. So while there's really no encrypting SMS outside of some transmissions from the telephone provider, like not all phones can decrypt messages. There's no handshake back and forth in order to decrypt messages. So it's risky to use SMS. There are actually tons of articles by Google, all kinds of different big tech giants saying like, let's not use SMS as a multi-factor anymore because it's not super secure.
It's funny how quickly that kind of stuff changes, right? Like as we start to realize more than we knew before. And this is one of the benefits of having a company like Auth0. Like this is not a sales pitch. This is more informative, but having a company who's like, that's what they're dedicated to, is staying on top of all, not trends in like a fad kind of way, but trends that like meet security expectations and follow along as security expectations change. That's one of the benefits of following a service that can do that kind of stuff and has the dedication to be on top of that stuff as it changes.
Definitely. And to be completely honest, it's not super hard for malware or any kind of malicious application to get access to your text messages. It's not super hard for that to happen, which means that it's very prone to phishing, social engineering, etc. On top of that, I mentioned email as being a factor, but even in Auth0's documentation, we explicitly say that email is technically not a second factor. You can use email with a one-time password, but it's not covering a second factor because at both times, username, password, something you know. If you send a password to your email, so you need to log into your email. Again, that's something you know. You know that login information for your email. You know your login information for the account. It's not hitting any of the possession or inheritance factors.
And that was an important distinction that I got from our conversation yesterday. Was that same exact explanation, and it's not. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but logging into an email is still username and password. So it doesn't have any extra proof, extra factor in this case.
Yeah,
it's just you still know something to be able to get access to it.
Yeah, so that's why with the ability to enable and disable what factors you want through Auth0, the interface. If you try to just have email, we don't let you do that.
Like
you need to have something else.
It's like somebody pops up on their shoulder and they're like, try again.
Yeah.
Maybe think about this differently.
Yep. So I think that covers HOTP pretty well. So after that is TOTP, which is time-based one-time password. So this is kind of like a step up in that security ladder. So a time-based one-time password is pretty much the exact same as a one-time password, except that counter that I was mentioning before is a unit of time. So like the current Unix time. So instead of creating a hash of the secret and the counter, what it does is create a hash of like the floored round number of like the current Unix time divided by some time frame. So like current Unix time divided by 30 seconds. That's our counter. And the great thing about that is that that allows us to, since Unix times are pretty in sync with all like every computer, every server, every device, we're able to remove this out of band step. So I said before that whenever we generate a one-time password with for SMS, we have to send that off through the network. We have to send that off to some other provider. We have to send that out of our control. But for TOTP, it's a little bit different. So whenever you register like Google Authenticator or Auth0 Guardian can technically do this. Duo has TOTP. I'm sure at some point you have had Google Authenticator or Authy or something like that. You've scanned a QR code. So what that does, whenever you scan the QR code, you're saving a secret to the keychain, the key store on your device. And that is then used to just take the current time with that secret and create a password, create a one-time password. And that's changing every 30 seconds. We've all opened up Google Authenticator and saw like, oh man, I have 5 seconds. I gotta hurry.
And then you mess it up. Then you have to do another one, and then hopefully you get it right the second or the third time.
Yeah, exactly.
Which again, I think this is an important aspect of the conversation too. Without really understanding the why, some of that stuff is just a hassle, right? From a strictly consumer's perspective. They're not necessarily thinking big picture. They're not necessarily thinking about the security on their other applications and their passwords in general. They see that kind of stuff and they're just like, oh, this is another thing I have to do. But that's why I think this conversation is so much fun and so useful for people starting to understand, like, here's the reasons why, and here's how these specific things help mitigate those things to make not only you yourself and your different accounts more protected, but also from a company perspective, like I for sure want to protect myself as much as I can against, like, if someone else's password gets leaked over there, I don't want that to affect my ability to do my job and work with my users securely on my platform. So there's lots of reasons why, and it benefits both sides. It's just some of the education there, I would say, is probably missing from the average consumer a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, in the past, I've always been annoyed whenever I had to enroll multi-factor authentication. I'm not going to lie. I always just want to get there. I want to log in. I don't want to think about it. But with TOTP, the thing that is the coolest, like I said, there's no out of band. So there's less opportunity for a bad actor, or there's less points of weaknesses in that communication chain. So it's just two basically completely separate systems where you're just typing in a code and verifying that it's the same. So it is really cool. It doesn't even really have to be communication between your phone and the server at that point. It's just the time's synchronized, and you take that secret.
I think, I don't think I had realized that's how that worked based on Unix time. That's actually a pretty cool learning for me, I think.
So moving on, TOTP, awesome, pretty secure, but not perfect. So there is this aspect of shared secret. So you have to have a secret stored on the server. You have to have the secret stored on the phone. Now, Google and Apple have done really well at making it difficult for people to extract secrets from the key store and the keychain of the devices, but it's not impossible. If somebody steals your phone, it's not great. Most likely, if they're stealing it with the intent of getting access to your accounts, they probably already know how to fetch secrets out of a device. On top of that, it's really easy to phish and social engineer. Like if somebody said, if you get an email and you think it's like you need to log in somewhere, but it's really like a man in the middle attack, like somebody just is putting their website in between you and the actual identity provider, they can just forward everything on. They can forward the password, everything, and get your access tokens and access to your account. So TOTP does not prevent that. And it's actually one of the man in the middle attacks are one of the more popular ways of causing these data breaches and getting access to these accounts, which is why you should always pay attention to the URLs that you're clicking.
Yep.
So with that being said, we're going to go once again up the next stair of security. So that is push notifications. So we all love push notifications, especially if you're on, pager duty. If you're on call, you love getting the push notifications for some incident that's happened.
There's sarcasm there for anybody who didn't pick that up.
Yes, but really, push notifications are cool. They were made incredibly popular by Google, Amazon, Apple. Google and Apple and Amazon, they all have these like pub sub services, publishing, subscribing services to help enable push notifications and make it pretty easy to have them in mobile apps. And they are really good for multi-factor authentication for a handful of reasons. So one of the reasons is that you're backed by the infrastructure, like the big tech giants. Like the majority of people using push notifications are most likely using Google or something with Amazon or Apple using their push notification store. So that's a really big plus. Next, with push notifications, everything stays in a back channel. You don't have to put anything through the front end. Like it's all a secure connection between your phone and the whatever service is hosting the pub sub feature. And that specifically, in most cases, use public key cryptography to make sure that the device that is acknowledging something is the one acknowledging it. So that alone is kind of miles above what we were able to see with TOTP and OTP. And in case I didn't explain it well enough, with push notifications, it's usually like you go to authenticate, you type in your password, you go, you click login, and they're like, "Hey, we sent you a notification. Press OK or press accept or press acknowledge," and it'll pop up on your phone. You press accept, press acknowledge, and you're good to go. You don't have to enter anything. Nothing has to necessarily be generated, and it's able to prove that the specific phone was able to authenticate this request.
So is that then specifically like something you have proof, like that you're proving that you have that device?
Yep, exactly. Cool. And so I actually have a little graph here. And basically they found that they did a survey and a test on all of these different multi-factor authentication methods, and said, okay, like how well do these actually protect you? And you can see that on device prompt, which is push notifications, it does better. It doesn't do like significantly better. Like it's not blowing SMS code out of the water, but it does better. Specifically with targeted attacks. It's not like you can't really have a like man in the middle attack with push notifications because the user isn't entering anything. There's nothing to proxy or forward. But you can still trick somebody into like, I could absolutely see myself just seeing something on my phone and clicking it, like not even thinking
about what it is. Yeah.
So if there are targeted attacks, a bulk fish, you can see right there, bulk phishing attack, prevents 99%. That's really good. But targeted attacks, like somebody's probably going to trick you at some point if they really want to get a hold of your info.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think an important thing here is like you mentioned like the difference between on-device prompt versus SMS code. And maybe can you do like a control plus and zoom in a little bit for people to, it might get a little blurry as you go. That seems like it's pretty good. Just to make sure people can see that. But there's not a huge difference between the on-device prompt and the SMS code, but this is the kind of thing like you don't want to not take advantage of the best way, right? Like if you can decrease your vulnerabilities, you're going to take that, because any sort of breach, especially for companies and big companies, means like lots of money, lots of time. It doesn't look good. All these things, like we've seen these big reports that pop up about so-and-so got breached or so-and-so got hacked or passwords got breached or whatever. You just don't want to take that chance. So I would imagine like as much of these things as you can add and get as close to 100% as possible, people are gonna want to do all they can.
Yeah, I mean that 14% in the targeted attack survey or tests there, like any one of us could be in that 14% that we could have been saved if we had on-device prompt or push notifications instead of SMS codes. But another interesting statistic, which is our next factor we're going to talk about, is security key. You can see right there that security key did very well in the tests that Google had done. So everybody is probably somewhat familiar with security keys, YubiKeys. I mean, I have one, right? I have a, let me get it, a Titan key right here by Google. I have another little itty bitty YubiKey, I don't know, somewhere. It's itty bitty. It's probably in some crack somewhere. Yeah, my first experience with using security keys, I've done a lot of, in the past, I've done a lot of contract work for the, and just to even get in your laptop, you needed to have a YubiKey. So that was my first experience. At that point, you had to have a YubiKey and a pretty strong passcode. And it was great. But, I had maybe lost it more than once, which is not great. So before we kind of dive into security keys specifically, let's talk about like how security keys fit in. So there is this alliance. It's called the FIDO Alliance, FIDO. It gives me a lot of Lord of the Ring vibes, like the Frodo Alliance, like you have my sword and my axe. But it's called the FIDO Alliance, and it's a group of a lot of different tech companies that are coming together to try and create these specifications for like the best way for users, the best and most secure way for users to authenticate on websites. And out of the FIDO Alliance has come FIDO2, which is kind of like this mothership project, which includes something called CTAP and something called WebAuthn. So WebAuthn is probably the one that everybody recognizes more than CTAP. CTAP, if you're really into embedded programming or hardware, you may know what CTAP is. It stands for Client to Authenticator Protocol. But we're not going to talk too much about that specifically because I am not an embedded guy, unfortunately.
Neither am I.
Yes. So WebAuthn is the web API that allows us to use security keys and biometrics. CTAP is going to be what browsers use to communicate with authenticators on the device or plugged into the device. So most people who are into web development are going to be interacting with WebAuthn. So FIDO2 is actually relatively new. I think the spec was officially published in 2018. So whenever we say that WebAuthn is a new feature, like it's not just that it's a new feature, the entire idea of it is pretty new.
Again, going back to the idea of like things change, and as they progress, how do we take advantage of the best security things that we can to make sure that we lower and lower the vulnerability percentage, or like whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, totally. These groups got together and realized like what we have now isn't working. The factors aren't necessarily working. We got to think of something else. There did exist FIDO1, which was a way to have security keys as just a second factor. Before we had FIDO1, security keys as a second factor works really well. But we kind of they kind of realized that we needed more. Like we wanted to start to go to this usernameless idea, this passwordless, usernameless. We want to get rid of the problem being passwords, you know? And FIDO1 wasn't great for that. So in comes FIDO2 and WebAuthn. So WebAuthn basically encapsulates security keys, YubiKeys, Titan keys, whatever kind of security you have, security key you have, and then biometrics, Touch ID, Face ID, also known as platform authenticators.
Because those are platform being like the operating system. Is that kind of what that refers back to? So like on iOS, you have the ability to log in with your fingerprint, which I don't do, by the way. Maybe just because I'm old school. But that, and then like the Windows Hello as an example on Windows machine, like that kind of stuff built into the operating system is what you're talking about.
Yep. So cool. Roaming authenticators are going to be your security keys, the things that you can take out, put in your pocket, go to a different computer, plug it in and use it. Yeah. Platform authenticators are authenticators that are embedded into the device.
Okay. Makes sense.
So in the case of Mac, we have a Touch ID.
Yeah.
So one thing that is important to point out, like I'm going to say biometrics a lot because Touch ID is cool. Biometrics is cool. It's a buzzword. I'm going to keep using it. But also you can technically use your Mac password in lieu of Touch ID. Like if your MacBook is closed and you don't have access to Touch ID, WebAuthn is going to ask you for your Mac password instead of the Touch ID.
Okay.
Yep, it is pretty interesting. But the thing that makes WebAuthn so secure is that it uses public key cryptography with phishing protection built in. So the specification calls for credentials that are created with WebAuthn to be scoped to a specific domain, which means if you register a security key on domain xyz.com, you cannot use it on anything else.
Okay.
You cannot use that specific credential on anything else. You can go and register a new credential somewhere else with that security key, or you can keep registering credentials kind of limitless, but a specific credential is limited to the domain in which it's registered.
Okay. And the credential itself is not like we wouldn't directly create that credential. I think that credential is like created for us based on one of those options that you talked about. And then the browser tracks that. Is that how, or it keeps that? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So there's a couple two different ways that it can work. There is non-residential keys and then residential keys. And I'm about to dive a little bit into some of the implementation details of WebAuthn. So I'm sorry, anybody, if it gets too boring or if I ramble a bit.
I'm certainly good with it. Hopefully people in the chat are too.
So with non-residential keys, whenever you create a WebAuthn credential or a credential to use with WebAuthn, what's going to happen is you plug in your key. The browser uses the CTAP protocol, which we mentioned earlier, uses CTAP to generate a new public key, a credential ID. Technically, it creates a new private key as well. So it creates new public key credentials, and that is sent over to the server to be used to verify that you are who you are. And so it's really interesting because one thing that I want to make sure that is covered. So with non-residential keys, you can have an unlimited amount of credentials. The way it does this, every time you create a new credential, you're creating a new public key pair. So private key, public key. The protocol calls for that public key material to be encrypted or key wrapped and then sent to the server. So in your credentials, your completely encrypted credentials. So technically speaking, it is totally safe. Like it is, it might as well be a public key at that point because of the way it's encrypted. It can only be decrypted and used by the authenticator itself, the embedded device or the security key. So that's sent over to the server. We save it on the server. And anytime you want to authenticate with that credential, the server sends that credential ID. The authenticator takes that credential ID, unencrypts it, takes the public and private key out of it, verifies everything is good to go, takes the metadata about what site you registered it with, and all kinds of different options that you can provide with WebAuthn, verifies everything is good to go, and then gives the go ahead, gives you like these what's called an assertion that you can then send to the server and do some more verification behind it. So in other words, the non-residential keys, everything's stored on the server, and the server sends that to the security key or the biometric authenticator, and it does its thing with that. But on the flip side, we have residential keys. And residential keys is really what's going to kind of be a game changer, especially when we start talking about usernameless. So what happens with residential keys is that that credential that gets created, that public key pair, it stays on the security key. It gets embedded into the flash memory of that key. And so what happens whenever you authenticate with a residential key, the server never has to know any of the public key pair information. It doesn't have to have the private key, public key, anything. All you have to have is a user handle, like some random generated identifier to send to the server to then link to that credential that's on the device. So quite literally, you can, like not using a username, not using a password, you can generate a credential that's scoped to a browser and a specific security key and use that to authenticate. And everything's just stored on the security key.
So it is a world without passwords and usernames. And this is not, it's so accepted, I guess. Username, password, email, password. Like that's what we do. That's what we've done for so long. And you're saying things are leading to like potentially down the road, no more usernames, no more passwords, or at least that being an option.
Yeah, definitely. And so the thing that's coolest about it is that it's really fast too. So WebAuthn in a lot of cases can provide multiple factors. It can be what you know, because a lot of like PIN codes, a lot of like YubiKeys require a PIN code. A biometric requires you to touch, or Face ID, so it's what you are. And then just having the device or the security key covers the possession factor. So in most cases, the WebAuthn is going to cover 2 factors. So even if you went completely usernameless, you go into the site, you know, all you have to do is touch your Touch ID, you're authenticated, you're good to go. You still covered 2 factors. And that alone, it kind of blows my mind because it's like, it's so easy and so simple, but
still hits
because of the nature of it. It can provide a really fast, while still very secure experience.
Yeah. I don't think I had picked up on that either. That's super cool.
Yeah. So with that being said, I think I want to do a quick demo of WebAuthn with security keys and biometrics. I'm going to go through here real fast and enable them. We did just release WebAuthn with FIDO device biometrics to beta, so that is very exciting. So I have security keys and biometrics enabled here, and I am going to go real quick to test my connection. So I'm going to choose security key. Now, real quick, I need to plug in my security key and follow the little guidance that we have here. Now I'm about to touch my security key. They have these little metal pieces on it.
Mm-hmm.
Security key touched. We'll give it a name. And then with biometrics enabled, it's going to ask me to enroll biometrics. We have this really cool thing that we've created called progressive enrollment, where we are going to progressively ask people to enroll device biometrics like on different devices. So like if you're on your Android and it supports biometrics, let's challenge something else, not biometrics, get you enrolled with biometrics so that next time you log in on your Android, you can just, touch it with your fingerprint real fast instead of using SMS.
Yeah. And I hadn't heard of that in, sorry, what was the progressive
enrollment?
Enrollment. Okay. So I've heard about progressive profiles, I guess, in the past. Of like
it is very much like progressive profiling.
Yeah. Where you you don't want to overwhelm the user with like, hey, give me all your info. It's like, hey, give me this one or two pieces of info about you. Then the next time, give me these next couple, so you don't give them like 50 form fills right up front.
Yep, totally. So I did click to use this device. I am touching my, let me bring in focus. All right. Now I'm touching my Touch ID, and everything went well with registration.
Yeah. And it seemed to pick up really fast too once you touched it.
And we're in and good to go. And next time I log in, so if I go and log in with this user, it's going to ask me for my biometric. And there we go. We're logged in.
Get the same result. Yeah.
And so I just logged in with 2 factors in 2 seconds. It's really awesome what this allows us to enable. So with biometrics, that brings us into a really secure way to implement passwordless, because you can have passwordless with OTP. You can have passwordless with email, SMS, push notifications technically. But at that point, there's a chance you may be missing out on having multi-factor authentication with that. So if you just provide a username and then you go use OTP, that's still just one factor. You're just covering what you have at that point. But passwordless with biometrics, you're going to hit what you are, what you have.
Yeah.
And it to me, it's kind of mind-blowing, because I don't have a lot of experience with using different passwordless flows. I don't think I've used very many applications that allow passwordless, just because it's not very convenient for most people or for most systems to implement. But doing it with WebAuthn, it can be very easy and very convenient to do, especially if you use Auth0.
And that, little Auth0 shout out there. But that's one of I've always been, I don't know, not hesitant to move forward with things, but a lot of what people talk about as being the most exciting stuff or the most secure stuff, for a while, it's just not necessarily that feasible to implement. And so what we're going to see, I imagine, is it's going to become easier to implement. People are going to get more educated on how does this stuff work? And I don't need a password. What? They're going to get more educated, get more comfortable with that. And then the adoption, I think, will just continue to rise from there. Cause it just takes time for these new things, especially culturally, for people to accept it. It takes a lot of time. So it will certainly be a process, but it's cool to know that we already have the ability to let other people support this in their applications, or at least some of the stuff you talked about today, some of the stuff maybe in the future. Yeah,
definitely. Of course, working for Auth0, I'm always going to recommend that you use Auth0. I'm very confident in the infrastructure that we have, the services that we have, the features that we have. But if you want to use WebAuthn in your own system, in your own authentication flows. At the moment, it is new, so the general developer ecosystem isn't that vast. I would like to quickly shout out a node library called Simple WebAuthn. It's really good. There's another one called FIDO2lib that's good. There are libraries out there that make it very painless to implement WebAuthn. At this point, of course, I want you to use Auth0, but if you're not going to use Auth0, then just go use WebAuthn, because it is so easy. At the end of the day, it's easy to implement, it's easy to use, and it is really, really secure.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about this a few times, like lowering the vulnerability. I keep saying vulnerability percentage, which is not a great word, but like lowering that potential gap in security is going to continue to be the goal, just because there's so much of our lives that are in other platforms, right? And like, it's almost like you can't even imagine what all information is out there about us as a whole, and what could happen if that information got out. So we want to try to protect that stuff as best we can.
Definitely. I know before I started working with WebAuthn, I didn't really think twice about using my Touch ID as a factor. I didn't think much about it. But now, since I've started working with it, I've gone through my Twitter account, my GitHub account, like my Gmail, everything. I've hooked up my my biometric or my security key, just because I'm kind of spoiled by how easy it is.
Yeah.
Like I usually have the most unreliable phone network providers, so I can never guarantee that a text message is going to be sent on time. So I highly recommend, everywhere you go, like, spend $50 and get a security key. Use that security key to secure your accounts, or at the very least, use the fingerprint scanner on your phone or on your Mac.
So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Jared, thanks a ton for coming on again, from like my personal perspective of me getting to learn some stuff. And I think based on the comments in the chat, people have really enjoyed it and learned a lot themselves.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm pretty stoked that I got to do this, especially because I get to talk about the awesome work my team does and show off some of the cool things that we've done. So I hope everybody is keeping an eye out, because we have a pretty exciting couple years coming for us.